Four men on horseback, torches blazing in the darkness. You have one choice, Thomas. Walk away or burn. Remember what I taught you, girl. Breathe, aim, but only if you must. A father with 47 kills in the Civil War, a daughter he trained in secret, and the men who made the mistake of threatening them both. Drop a like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from right now. This is a story you don't want to miss. 12 days before that night, the world was different. The night air carried the smell of burning kerosene and fear. Four men stood outside the fence line of the Wright farm, their shadows long and twisted in the torchlight. Daniel Mercer sat straight in his saddle, a man who believed the world owed him something and had come to collect. His voice cut through the darkness like a blade through silk. You have one choice, Thomas. Walk away or burn. Inside the farmhouse, Sarah Wright stood beside her father, her hands trembling round the grip of an old revolver. The weight of it felt foreign despite years of practice. Thomas Wright, 52 years old, with the posture of a man who had once commanded soldiers, placed his weathered hand over hers. His touch was gentle but steady, the kind of touch that said more than words ever could. Remember what I taught you, girl. Breathe, aim, but only if you must. The torchlight flickered. Someone outside laughed, a sound without humor. A gun fired into the air, the report sharp and final. Sarah's finger moved toward the trigger. Then everything went black. 12 days before that night, the world was different. The danger had not yet shown its teeth. The threat was still a whisper, not a scream. The sun rose over the Wright farm the way it had for 22 years, patient and indifferent. Thomas stood on the porch of his modest home, a cup of coffee cooling in his calloused hands. He did not drink. He simply held the cup, his eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where light bled slowly across the Wyoming grasslands. His shoulders carried the weight of more than age. They carried memory. In his mind, unbidden came the sound of rifle fire, the smell of gunpowder and blood, the taste of fear in his mouth as he lay prone on Cemetery Ridge, July of 1863, watching men die by the hundreds in the valley below. He had been 28, then a sergeant with the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, his finger steady on the trigger of a Springfield rifle that could kill a man from 300 yards away. 47 times he had pulled that trigger. 47 men who never made it home. The memory faded as the sun climbed higher. Thomas blinked, returning to the present, to the farm, to the life he had built with his hands after the war. A life that was supposed to be simple, safe. The screen door opened behind him. Sarah emerged, her hands dusted with flour from the morning's bread making. She was 20 years old, her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She had learned early not to ask why her father stood watch each morning, staring at nothing as if expecting an enemy that never came. "Pa," she said quietly, "breakfast is getting cold." Thomas turned, and for a moment his face softened. "Just watching the sunrise, girl." Old habit. Sarah knew better. Her father had no old habits, only old wounds. She stepped beside him, following his gaze across the wheat fields that stretched toward the tree line a quarter-mile distant. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked safe. Then her eyes caught something that made her breath hitch. The fence line near the road. A section of the wooden rail had been cut a clean slice through the middle, fresh wood showing pale against the weathered gray. "Pa, when did that happen?" Thomas was already moving, coffee forgotten. He crossed the yard in long strides, Sarah close behind. When he reached the fence, he knelt, running his fingers over the cut. The wood was smooth, severed by a sharp tool, not broken by age or weather. He looked at the ground. Boot prints, recent, pressed into the soft earth near the post. 2 men, maybe 3. "This wasn't here yesterday afternoon," Sarah said, her voice tight. Thomas stood slowly, his knees protesting. His eyes scanned the tree line, the road, the empty fields. No one in sight. But someone had been here. Someone had sent a message. "Go inside," he said. "Check the rifle." "Pa, what's happening?" Thomas looked at his daughter, and for the first time in years, she saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Not fear, recognition. The look of a soldier who knows the enemy has found him. "Just do it, Sarah. Now." She went. Thomas remained by the fence, his mind working through possibilities. This was not random. Cut fences happen, but not like this. This was precise, intentional. A warning wrapped in the pretense of vandalism. He thought of the men who had been asking about his land, about the railway company, about the offers he had refused. He thought of Daniel Mercer. The dusty Rose Saloon sat at the edge of Red Hollow like a rotting tooth in an otherwise respectable mouth. At 9 in the morning, it should have been empty, the tables still sticky from the night before, the air thick with the ghosts of tobacco and regret. But Daniel Mercer did not keep regular hours. He kept useful hours. He sat alone at a corner table, a map of Red Hollow spread before him like a general planning a campaign. Red pencil marks crossed the paper in precise lines, circling properties, noting elevations, marking distances. At the center of it all, outlined in heavy ink, sat the Wright Farm. 40 acres of prime land sitting exactly where the Pacific Railway wanted to lay track through the mountain pass. Augustus Miller, the saloon's owner, approached with a pot of coffee and a face that had learned long ago not to show what he thought. He was 46 barrel-chested, with hands that could break a man's jaw or pour a perfect drink with equal ease. He had loved Margaret Wright once before she chose Thomas. He loved her daughter still in the quiet way a man loves what he can never have. "That's the third time this week you've studied that map, Mr. Mercer." Daniel did not look up. He was 36, lean and sharp-featured, dressed too well for a frontier town. His clothes spoke of Philadelphia, of education, of a life that had once promised more than this. "A man should know the land he's investing in," he said. Augustus set the coffee down harder than necessary. "Investing or taking now?" Daniel looked up, his gray eyes flat and cold as winter stone. "Mr. Miller, I'm a businessman. I offer fair prices for fair land. If people refuse," he shrugged, a small movement that carried the weight of threat, "then I offer opportunities to reconsider." The door opened. Henry Dobbs entered, red-faced and sweating, despite the morning cool. He was 28, soft around the middle, the kind of man who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. He crossed to Daniel's table, glancing nervously at Augustus. "Boss, I did what you said. Cut a piece of their fence last night. Old man probably found it by now." Daniel nodded, once his face expressionless. "Good. Fear works best when it builds slowly." Raymond Dalton followed Henry through the door, a bottle of whiskey already in his hand, though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. He was 31, tall and thin, with eyes that held a meanness liquor only made sharper. "When do we stop playing games? I say we burn the damn place and be done with it." Daniel's mouth tightened in distaste. "Because, Raymond, violence without justification gets you hanged. We need this town on our side first. We need them to see the Wrights as the problem, not us." Behind them, moving quiet as shadow, came Elijah Barnes, 27 years old, shoulders hunched, as if expecting a blow that never quite landed. He took a seat at the far end of the table, saying nothing, his hands wrapped around a beer he would not drink. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, watching the street, as if looking for an escape he lacked the courage to take. Daniel pulled out a sheaf of papers from his leather satchel, spreading them across the map. Contracts, deeds, bank records, the machinery of legal theft. "Gentlemen, listen carefully. The Wright Farm stands on the only viable route for the Pacific Railway through this mountain range. The company will pay $50,000 for that land. Thomas Wright refused my offer of $500. Henry whistled low. $50,000. "I purchased an exclusive contract with the railway for $5,000, Daniel continued. "If I deliver the land within 30 days, they pay me $20,000 as a brokerage fee. If I fail," he paused, his jaw tight, "I lose everything." Again. The word hung in the air like smoke. Augustus, wiping down the bar, heard it, saw the desperation beneath Daniel's controlled exterior. This was not simply about money. This was about a man drowning, grasping for anything that might keep him afloat. "So what's the play?" Raymond asked, leaning forward. Daniel's eyes glittered. "We make Thomas Wright into a threat, a dangerous man, a war veteran with violent tendencies who poses a risk to this peaceful community." "But he's just a farmer," Henry protested. "No." Daniel's voice dropped to something almost gentle, which made it more frightening. "He's a former sergeant in the Union Army, a sharpshooter. 47 confirmed kills in the war, and I've heard rumors," he let the words drift, "that he's been training his daughter." Elijah's head snapped up. "His daughter, Sarah Wright, she's just—" "That's exactly the problem, Elijah." Daniel cut him off smoothly. "No one knows what she is, and fear of the unknown is the most powerful weapon there is." He stood gathering his papers. "Tomorrow night, this saloon is hosting a shooting contest. Old tradition, good entertainment. We're going to invite Sarah Wright to participate." "To embarrass her," Henry grinned. No, Daniel's smile was cold and calculated. To let her win. And then once the whole town sees a woman shooting with military precision, they'll understand what's living next door to them. A killer, trained by a killer. And suddenly our proposal to remove them won't seem so unreasonable. Augustus's hands stilled on the glass he was polishing. He said nothing, but his mind was already working, already planning the telegram he would send to Cheyenne to the federal marshal's office to anyone who might stop what was coming. The afternoon sun hung heavy over the Wright farm, turning the wheat fields to gold. Thomas sat at the small table in the main room, his hands resting on the worn wood surface. Before him lay an old wooden chest, its lid open, its contents spilled like secrets finally too heavy to carry. A Union Army uniform, faded blue wool with brass buttons tarnished to green. In metal, the ribbon frayed. Letters tied with string, yellow with age. And a rifle, a Springfield bottom, 1861. The weapon of choice for sharpshooters, its barrel still oiled, still maintained, still ready despite 2 decades of storage. Sarah stood in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen these things. Her father had hidden them away before she was old enough to ask questions. "Pa," she whispered, "what is all this?" Thomas did not turn. His voice when it came was steady but distant, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. "It's time you knew everything, Sarah. Time you understood what I was, what I am." He lifted the rifle, feeling its familiar weight, the balance that his hands remembered, even if his heart wished to forget. This was my weapon. Gettysburg, Antietam, Fredericksburg. Every major battle from 62 to 65. The room fell silent except for the creak of floorboards as Sarah crossed to her father. She sat beside him, her eyes on the rifle, on the uniform, on the face of the man who had raised her with kindness and patience and never once mentioned the war. How many, she asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. 47. Thomas's voice was flat factual. All in combat, all following orders, all legal under the Articles of War. He paused. All of them someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. His hands shook slightly as he set the rifle down. I told myself it was duty, that I was protecting my brothers in arms, that every man I killed meant 10 Union soldiers who lived. He looked at his daughter then and his eyes were haunted. But at night, Sarah, when it's quiet, I still see their faces. Sarah reached out, covering her father's weathered hand with her own. Why are you telling me this now? Because danger is coming. Thomas turned his hand over, gripping hers tightly. Because the men who cut our fence last night won't stop there. Because Daniel Mercer wants our land, and he won't take no for an answer. And because he met her eyes, you need to understand why I taught you to shoot. Memories flooded Sarah then. 6 years of secret lessons, the rifle practice in the canyon where no one could hear, the way her father corrected her stance, her breathing, her aim, with the patience of a trained instructor. She had thought it strange, but had never questioned it. Thomas Wright did not do things without reason. The night your mother died, Thomas said, and his voice broke on the words. The night those men killed her on the road from town, I realized something. The law couldn't protect us. Wouldn't protect us. If my family was going to survive in this world, they needed to protect themselves. He stood moving to the window, looking out across the land he had worked for 2 decades. I swore I would never touch a gun again after the war. Swore I was done with killing. But then Margaret was gone, and you were all I had left, and I understood that some promises can't be kept. Sarah rose, joining him at the window. Pa, what do we do? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, we prepare, and we hope we don't have to use what I taught you. But if it comes to that, his voice hardened into something she had never heard before, the voice of Sergeant Wright, the voice of a man who had survived 4 years of hell. You remember this? Shoot only when you must, but when you must shoot to protect, not to punish. The sun dipped lower, painting the wheat fields in shades of amber and blood. That evening, Sarah rode into Red Hollow on the old mare, her father's words still echoing in her mind. She needed medicine for Thomas, whose cough had worsened in recent weeks, a wet rasp that spoke of lungs damaged by too many nights, sleeping in cold trenches, too many years breathing gunpowder smoke. The town's doctor was useless, more interested in whiskey than healing, but Augustus kept a supply of morphine for emergencies. The Dusty Rose Saloon was quiet when she entered just past 7 o'clock, the hour when decent women were at home preparing supper. The men inside turned to look conversations stuttering to silence. Sarah felt their eyes like hands touching judging, wondering what brought a farm girl into a saloon alone. Augustus was behind the bar, and his face showed relief when he saw her, followed quickly by concern. "Sarah, is everything all right? I need medicine," she said quietly. For Pa's cough, Dr. Henshaw is drunk again. Augustus nodded, already moving toward the back room where he kept supplies. "Come with me, we'll get you fixed up." But before Sarah could follow, the front door opened. Daniel Mercer entered, flanked by Henry and Raymond. Elijah came last, his eyes on the floor. The air in the room changed, thickening with tension. "Well," Daniel said, and his voice was smooth as oil and just as slick. "Miss Wright." Perfect timing. Sarah turned her back straight, her face carefully blank. "Mr. Mercer." Daniel crossed the room with the confidence of a man who believed he owned it. "Since you're here, I have a proposition. Tomorrow night, we're hosting a shooting contest. Old tradition. Good entertainment. Prize is $100. He paused, letting the number sink in. "I heard your father used to hunt. Perhaps he taught you a thing or two." Every instinct told Sarah to refuse, to leave, to run. But running would show weakness, and weakness invited predators. "I don't think that's appropriate." "Come now," Raymond drawled from behind Daniel. "Unless you're scared, a farm girl like you wouldn't last 5 seconds with a real gun anyway." The insult hung in the air. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Henry Dobbs, already half drunk, gestured wildly with the whiskey bottle in his hand. The bottle slipped from his fingers, spinning through the air toward Sarah. What happened next took less than a second, but every man in that room would remember it for the rest of their lives. Sarah did not scream, did not jump back. Her body reacted with training she had spent years acquiring, muscle memory, drilled into her by a father who understood that survival required more than hope. She dropped, low, her head tilting left, her eyes tracking the bottle's trajectory with the precision of someone who had learned to read the flight of bullets. The bottle smashed on the floor 2 inches from her boots. The saloon fell absolutely silent. Daniel Mercer's eyes narrowed, his mind working through what he had just witnessed. That was not the reaction of a frightened girl. That was the reaction of someone who had been trained to assess threats, to calculate danger, to move with purpose rather than panic. "Interesting reflexes, Miss Wright." Augustus emerged from the back room, morphine in hand, his face carefully neutral, but his mind racing. He had seen what they had seen. Sarah had just revealed more than she intended. Sarah straightened, forcing her breathing to remain calm even as her heart hammered. She met Daniel's eyes without flinching. "Fine, I'll join your contest. Tomorrow at noon." Daniel smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Excellent, I look forward to it." As Sarah took the medicine from Augustus and turned to leave, Elijah Barnes stepped forward, his voice low, meant only for her. "Miss Wright, wait." She paused. Elijah glanced at Daniel, then back to Sarah, his face conflicted. "Don't come tomorrow. This isn't just a contest. Daniel's planning something." What Sarah asked, though, part of her already knew. "I don't know exactly, but I heard him talking to someone in Cheyenne about removing obstacles." Elijah's hands trembled slightly. "Please, just stay home." Sarah looked at the young man, saw the fear in his eyes, the guilt. "Thank you, Mr. Barnes. But if I don't come, they'll know I'm afraid. And fear is what they want." She left the saloon, stepping into the cooling evening air, but her mind was racing. The contest was a trap. Daniel wanted her to reveal her skills, to give him ammunition to use against her family. But refusing to participate would only delay the inevitable. Men like Daniel Mercer did not give up. They simply changed tactics. The ride home felt longer than it should have. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper. Sarah kept one hand near the knife at her belt, her father's voice in her mind. "Always be aware. Always have an exit. Never let them see you're afraid even when you are." When she reached the farm, Thomas was waiting on the porch, the rifle across his lap. He had heard the horse coming from half a mile away, old instincts never quite dormant. His face relaxed when he saw it was Sarah, but the tension did not leave his shoulders. She dismounted, tied the horse, and climbed the porch steps. "Pa, they challenged me to a shooting contest tomorrow." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Mercer?" "Yes, and you accepted. It was not a question." Thomas knew his daughter. knew she would not back down any more than he would have at her age. He sighed, a sound like wind through dry grass. Come inside. We need to talk about what happens tomorrow. They sat at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low, casting long shadows on the walls. Thomas spread his hands flat on the wood, gathering his thoughts. Tomorrow is not about winning, Sarah. It's about control. They want you to show your skill so they can paint you as dangerous. If you shoot well, they'll say you're a threat. If you shoot poorly, they'll say you're useless, and by extension, so is our claim to this land. So what do I do? Thomas leaned back, his eyes distant, calculating. You shoot well enough to be respectable, but not so well that you seem threatening. You miss your first shot. Let them laugh. Then you hit your second, but not perfectly. Make it look like luck, like you got nervous and overcorrected. And the third shot, if there's a third shot, Thomas said quietly, it means the plan has already failed. At that point, he met her eyes. You shoot to end it. You shoot to show them exactly what you're capable of. Because if it gets that far, they already know. And hiding it won't help anymore. Sarah absorbed this understanding, the layers of strategy her father had learned in 4 years of war. Combat was not just about killing. It was about psychology, about making your enemies see what you wanted them to see, about controlling the narrative, even as bullets flew. Hey, she said slowly, why do I feel like we're fighting a war? Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand. Because we are, sweetheart. It's not a war with uniforms and flags. But it's a war nonetheless. For our home. For our right to live free. And in war, he squeezed her hand gently. The first rule is never let them see you're afraid. They sat together in the lamplight, father and daughter soldier and student, preparing for a battle that would be fought not with armies, but with a single rifle and the will to use it. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere in the darkness, men were planning, plotting, sharpening their intentions like knives. The Wright farm stood silent under a sky full of stars that had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. The strong against the weak, the many against the few. The only variable was whether the few had the courage to stand. And inside that small farmhouse, under that vast sky, Thomas Wright looked at his daughter and saw not weakness, but steel. Saw the woman she had become despite his attempts to shelter her. Saw Margaret's eyes looking back at him, full of a determination that transcended death itself. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow we find out if I taught her well enough. If the legacy I'm leaving is one of strength or tragedy. Tomorrow the contest would begin. And with it, the slow unraveling of a carefully maintained peace that had never been peace at all. Only a pause between conflicts. Only the breath before the storm. The night passed slowly. Sarah did not sleep. Thomas did not sleep. They sat together in the main room, weapons close, ears attuned to every sound outside, waiting, preparing, knowing that whatever came with the dawn would change everything. And in Red Hollow, Daniel Mercer sat in his rented room above the general store, staring at the map on his wall, at the red circle around the Wright property, and he smiled. Not with joy, with the grim satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. But he had never fought a war, had never learned that the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. He would learn. They all would learn. The sun would rise. The contest would begin. And before the day was done, Red Hollow would understand that some people, when pushed far enough, do not break. They sharpen. Dawn came to Red Hollow with the weight of expectation. The town woke differently that morning, conversations at breakfast tables turning inevitably toward the contest, toward the Wright girl who had accepted a challenge no respectable woman should have touched. Wives whispered to husbands about propriety. Men grinned and placed bets. Children sensed the electricity in the air without understanding its source. By 11 o'clock, the lot behind the Dusty Rose Saloon had transformed into something resembling a festival ground. Someone had dragged barrels aside to clear space. Wooden posts had been driven into the hard-packed earth, tin plates hanging from wires at varying distances. A rough line had been scratched in the dirt to mark where shooters would stand. The backstop was a wall of old lumber, scarred and splintered from years of use. People gathered slowly at first, then in larger numbers. 80 souls, eventually more than had assembled for anything since the 4th of July celebration 3 years prior. They came with blankets and baskets, with flasks hidden in coat pockets, with the hunger for spectacle that lives in the human heart like a dormant seed waiting for blood to make it bloom. Thomas Wright stood at the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, arms crossed over his chest. Augustus Miller positioned himself nearby close enough to offer silent support far enough to avoid drawing attention. Both men watched the gathering with the wariness of those who understood that crowds could turn from celebration to violence with frightening speed. Daniel Mercer moved through the assembly like a politician, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the role of benefactor and entertainer. He had dressed well for the occasion, his suit pressed, his boots polished. A man of refinement bringing culture to a rough town. Henry Dobbs followed in his wake, grinning and loud, while Raymond Dalton leaned against a wagon wheel, already nursing a bottle despite the early hour. Elijah Barnes stood apart from them all, his face troubled, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He had not slept, had spent the night wrestling with his conscience, with the knowledge of what was coming, with the question of what kind of man stands by while others plot destruction. He had no answer, only the sick feeling in his gut that he was complicit in something that would end badly for everyone. At 11:15, a hush rippled through the crowd. Sarah Wright had arrived. She came alone, riding the old mare, her back straight, her face composed. She wore a simple dress, practical boots, her hair tied back with a strip of leather. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to draw attention. But every eye found her anyway, assessing, judging, wondering what farm girl thought she could compete with men. She dismounted, tied her horse, and walked to where Daniel stood near the shooting line. Her movements were economical, controlled, no wasted motion, no nervous energy. Just calm purpose that unsettled those watching more than bravado would have. "Miss Wright," Daniel said, extending his hand. "So glad you could make it." His smile was wide and empty as a door to nowhere. Sarah did not take his hand. "Mr. Mercer, what are the rules?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Daniel's face, quickly masked. "Simple enough. 3 rounds, each round at a greater distance. Most hits wins. Prize is $100. He paused. "Unless you'd prefer to withdraw." "No shame in it. I'm here," Sarah said flatly. "Let's begin." The crowd murmured a sound like wind through leaves. Some approved of her directness. Others found it unseemly. All leaned forward, hungry for what would happen next. 5 contestants lined up. Henry Dobbs, red-faced and sweating. Raymond Dalton, steady despite the alcohol. 2 local hunters, Jack Morrison and Pete Henley, men who knew rifles the way sailors knew the sea. And Sarah Wright, the only woman standing at the end of the line like a question mark, punctuating a sentence no one knew how to finish. Round 1, 30 feet, 3 tin plates hanging still in the windless morning. Jack Morrison went first. A solid man in his 40s, beard shot through with gray eyes, calm. He raised his rifle with the confidence of someone who had fed his family with marksmanship for 20 years. The shot rang out. The plate jump struck near the edge. Applause scattered through the crowd. Pete Henley followed, younger, eager to prove himself. His shot went wide, missing entirely. Groans and laughter mixed. He lowered his rifle, face burning. Henry Dobbs stepped to the line, making a show of checking his weapon, aiming with exaggerated care. His shot went wild, missing by 2 feet. The laughter was louder now, not entirely unkind. Henry played it off with a theatrical bow, drawing more chuckles. He had succeeded in his role, the comic relief that kept things light. Raymond Dalton did not smile. He raised his rifle with grim focus and fired. The plate rang, struck off center, but hit nonetheless. He nodded once, satisfied, and stepped back without ceremony. Then it was Sarah's turn. She moved to the line, aware of every eye on her, every held breath, every unspoken judgment. She could feel her father's presence at the edge of the crowd, could almost hear his voice. "Miss the first shot. Let them laugh." She raised the rifle. It felt heavy in a way it never had during practice, weighted not with steel, but with consequence. She sighted down the barrel at the hanging plate, at a target she could hit 9 times out of 10 in the canyon behind her home where no one watched. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet to the right of the target. The laughter that erupted was immediate and loud, tinged with relief. Here was confirmation of what they wanted to believe, that the strange display at the saloon had been luck, that a woman with a gun was still just a woman out of her depth and destined to fail. "Knew it," Raymond called out. "Just a girl playing dress-up." Henry doubled over, slapping his knee. "Lucky reflexes at the bar, my eye." Sarah lowered the rifle, her face carefully neutral, but inside her chest something tight and hot coiled like a spring. She met Daniel's eyes across the space between them and saw him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something closer to suspicion. Augustus Miller, standing beside Thomas, leaned close and whispered, "She missed on purpose." Thomas said nothing, but his jaw was tight. He had taught her this strategy, had told her to hide her skill, but watching his daughter endure mockery still cut deeper than he had expected. Round two, 50 feet, smaller plates. The wind had picked up slightly enough to matter. Jack Morrison fired first again. His bullet struck the edge of the plate barely. The crowd cheered anyway. Pete Henley, determined to redeem himself, took extra time aiming. His shot went high, missing clean. He cursed under his breath and stepped back. Henry Dobbs went next, still playing the fool. He fired quickly, his bullet going wide by several feet. He threw up his hands in mock despair, drawing scattered laughs, but this time fewer people joined in. The entertainment value was wearing thin. Raymond approached the line with the bottle still in one hand. He set it down, raised his rifle, and fired without seeming to aim. The plate rang out, struck near center. He retrieved his bottle and walked away without acknowledging the applause. Sarah stepped forward for her second shot. The laughter had died down, now replaced by a different kind of attention, curiosity mixed with doubt. What if the first miss really had been an accident? What if there was more to this farm girl than they had assumed? She raised the rifle, and this time her movements were different, smoother, more assured. She took her time adjusting her stance, correcting for the breeze that tugged at her dress. Her breathing slowed. Her world narrowed to the target. Behind her, Thomas held his breath. Sarah fired. The plate exploded backward, the bullet punching through dead center with a sound like a bell tolling. Absolute silence for 3 full seconds. Then noise erupted. Not applause exactly. Something more confused. Excited questions overlapping. How did she do that? Was that luck? Did you see how she aimed? Daniel Mercer's smile had vanished. He stared at Sarah with naked calculation. Now the social mask dropped. Henry and Raymond exchanged glances, no longer laughing. Even Elijah, standing at the back of the crowd, straightened his eyes wide. But it was the townspeople's reaction that mattered most. Sarah could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable. They were no longer looking at her with amusement or dismissal. They were looking at her with something else. Uncertainty. The first seeds of fear. An old man near the front, a veteran with one arm gone at the elbow, spoke loud enough for those around him to hear. "That ain't luck, that's training. Military training." The words spread like ripples in a pond. People began whispering, leaning together, casting glances at Thomas Wright, standing still as stone at the crowd's edge. Someone remembered. Thomas had been a soldier, a sharpshooter, 47 confirmed kills, and he had a daughter. The pieces clicked together in a dozen minds at once, forming a picture that made comfortable assumptions shatter and reform into something sharper and more frightening. Sarah felt the change wash over her like cold water. She had done what her father asked, tried to hide behind failure before revealing competence. But it was too late now. They had seen, and seeing they began to understand, or thought they understood, which was more dangerous. Daniel stepped forward, raising his hands for attention. "Well now, it seems we have a genuine competition." He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying. "One more round, ladies and gentlemen, 75 feet. Let's see if Miss Wright's second shot was skill or another happy accident." The crowd murmured agreement, excited now, wanting resolution, wanting to know if they had just witnessed something remarkable or merely lucky. Sarah met her father's eyes across the assembly. Thomas gave the slightest shake of his head, a motion only she would recognize. "Don't. Walk away." But Sarah understood something her father did not yet see. Walking away now would confirm their suspicions without providing answers. They would spend the next week speculating, imagining building her into a monster in their minds. Better to show them the truth and let it speak for itself. She turned back to Daniel. "One more round then." Jack Morrison went first. The distance was challenging, even for experienced hunters. His bullet struck low, hitting the post below the plate. Close, but not close enough. The crowd offered sympathetic applause. Raymond Dalton stepped up, swaying slightly. He fired without ceremony and missed entirely, the bullet disappearing into the backstop. He shrugged unconcerned and drank. Sarah was last. She approached the line feeling the weight of every stare, every unspoken question, every fear and hope and doubt focused on her like sunlight through glass. This was the moment her father had warned her about, the point where hiding became impossible. She raised the rifle. The world went silent in that strange way it always did when she truly focused. The crowd disappeared. The wind faded. There was only the target, the weight of the weapon, the rhythm of her heartbeat. She could hear her father's voice from years of training. Breathe in, halfway out. Hold. The moment between heartbeats. That's when you fire. She squeezed the trigger. The plate rang like a church bell, the bullet punching through exact center, the metal spinning on its wire before falling free, the wire unable to hold it. The silence that followed was different than before. Not surprise, not uncertainty, recognition. The crowd understood now. This was not luck. This was skill honed over years. This was the daughter of a soldier trained by a man who knew how to kill from distances that made murder impersonal. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly. She did not celebrate, did not smile, simply stood there calm and still as the weight of their realization pressed down on the assembly like a physical thing. Daniel Mercer stepped forward, his face a careful mask now, but his eyes bright with something ugly. "Well done, Miss Wright. Truly impressive." He turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, our winner, $100 to Miss Sarah Wright." The applause was scattered, uncomfortable. People clapped because it was expected, but their faces showed confusion, wariness. What did this mean? Was this woman dangerous? What else could she do? Mrs. Hemsworth, the blacksmith's wife, turned to her neighbor. "That's not natural. Farm girls don't shoot like that." The neighbor nodded. "Her father's a veteran, a sharpshooter. I heard he trained her." "But why?" Mrs. Hemsworth's voice dropped to a whisper. "What's he preparing her for?" The questions spread. The doubts multiplied. By the time Sarah collected her winnings from Daniel, half the crowd had already decided she was something to be feared rather than admired. Daniel handed her the money, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You just made a mistake, Miss Wright. People fear what they don't understand. And I know exactly how to use fear." Sarah took the bills without looking at them. "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because you challenged me. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Daniel smiled, cold and satisfied. "Actually, yes. Thank you for playing your part so perfectly." Sarah turned and walked through the crowd toward her horse. People parted for her, but not with respect, with unease. Parents pulled children closer. Men's hands drifted toward concealed weapons. The farm girl they had known, or thought they knew, had been replaced by something they could not categorize, could not control. Thomas met her at the edge of the assembly. Without speaking, they walked together to where the horses were tied. Augustus joined them, his face grave. "That went as bad as it could," Augustus said quietly. Thomas said nothing. His mind was already working through implications, through next steps, through the cascade of consequences that would flow from this moment like water through broken ice. They rode home in silence, father and daughter, with Augustus following on his own mount. Behind them, Red Hollow buzzed with speculation and fear, exactly as Daniel Mercer had planned. The next 3 days passed like a slow poison, working through the town's bloodstream. On the first day, Sarah went to buy supplies at the general store. Mrs. Hemsworth, who had sold her flour and sugar every week for 5 years, suddenly had nothing available. Sold out dear. The 3 full sacks visible behind the counter said otherwise. Children who had once played near the right fence line were called home by nervous mothers. The road past the farm, usually busy with travelers, grew quiet as people found alternate routes that added miles to their journeys. On the second day, someone painted a red X on the right's fence post, the mark stark against the weathered wood. No message, no explanation, just the X like a brand on livestock. Like a target. Thomas found it at dawn. He stared at it for a long time, his weathered face unreadable. Then he went to the barn, retrieved a can of paint, and carefully covered it. But covering it did not erase what it meant. They were being marked, separated, made into something other. That afternoon, a town meeting was called at the schoolhouse. Thomas and Sarah were not invited. Augustus attended and reported back that evening, his face tight with anger. Daniel gave a speech, Augustus said, sitting at the Wright's kitchen table. Very reasonable, very concerned. Talked about safety, about protecting families, about the responsibility the town has to address potential threats before they become actual dangers. Thomas poured coffee with steady hands, and people listened, most of them. Augustus accepted the cup. "He's smart, Thomas. He never said you were dangerous. Just raised questions. Wondered aloud why a farmer needed military-grade shooting skills. Asked what happens if someone crosses you if you feel threatened. Made it sound like he was just being cautious. And Sheriff Donovan Thomas asked. Augustus grimaced. Sat in the back, listened. Didn't say much. But he didn't shut it down either. Sarah, standing by the window, spoke without turning. They're building a case, making us into something we're not, so they can justify whatever comes next. Thomas looked at his daughter, saw the understanding in her stance, the way her shoulders had squared over these 3 days. She was learning, he realized. Learning the hardest lesson war had to teach. That truth was less powerful than perception. That being right meant nothing if people believed you were wrong. On the third day, Thomas went to town alone. He needed to speak with the bank manager about a loan extension paperwork that should have been routine. He found the bank closed early, the manager unavailable, the clerk apologetic but firm. Come back next week, perhaps. On his way out, 2 men he had known for a decade crossed the street to avoid passing him on the boardwalk. He stopped at the Dusty Rose, needing to see Augustus to plan to understand the full scope of what was happening. The saloon was empty except for Augustus behind the bar and Daniel Mercer sitting alone at his usual corner table. Thomas, Augustus said, and there was warning in his voice. Thomas ignored it. He walked to Daniel's table, standing over the smaller man with all the controlled menace of someone who had learned violence in the most thorough school imaginable. What's your endgame, Mercer? Daniel looked up slowly, unafraid. Survival. Mr. Wright, same as you. I have 30 days to deliver your land to the railway company or I lose everything. So yes, I'm applying pressure. Yes, I'm using the town's fear to isolate you. And yes, it's working. You're destroying my family's reputation based on lies. Am I? Daniel leaned back in his chair. I haven't lied about anything. You were a sharpshooter. You did train your daughter. Those are facts. I'm simply letting people draw their own conclusions. Thomas's hands clenched at his sides, old reflexes urging him toward violence that would solve nothing and confirm everything Daniel wanted people to believe. You can't force us off our land with rumors. Daniel smiled, and for the first time, Thomas saw the desperation underneath the calculated exterior. Actually, Mr. Wright, I can, because tomorrow Sheriff Donovan will receive a legal notice that you have an outstanding debt from 1866, $1,200 plus interest, due in 30 days. If you can't pay, the bank forecloses. Your land becomes ours, legally. Thomas felt the floor shift beneath him. That debt was forgiven. After the war, they told us, not according to these records from Philadelphia Bank. Daniel patted a leather case beside him. I'm very thorough. And while you're trying to prove these documents are forgeries, which they are, but good luck proving it, time runs out. The foreclosure happens, and you lose everything. Augustus had come around the bar, his face flushed with anger. Thomas, don't. He's trying to provoke you. But Thomas was not looking at Daniel anymore. He was looking at the future, at the chess game, playing out moves ahead, at the careful trap that had been built around his family, while they focused on the obvious threats and missed the quiet ones. We're not selling, Thomas said, his voice low and hard. We're not leaving. That land is my wife's grave, my daughter's inheritance. You can forge all the papers you want. We're not going anywhere. Daniel's smile faded. Then you're a fool, and fools get buried with their principles. Thomas turned and walked out, Augustus following. When they were outside, away from Daniel's hearing, Augustus grabbed Thomas's arm. He's not bluffing. I checked with my contact at the telegraph office. Messages going back and forth to Cheyenne, to Philadelphia, to Denver. He's building something bigger than just rumors. I know, Thomas said. That's why I need you to send a telegram for me. To the U.S. Marshal's office. Report fraud, forgery, conspiracy to steal land. Get federal authorities involved. Augustus nodded. I'll do it tonight. But Thomas, even if they investigate, that takes time. And Daniel said you have 30 days. Then we hold for 30 days, Thomas said simply. Whatever it takes. They parted ways, Augustus to his telegraph, Thomas to his farm. The sun was setting, painting Red Hollow in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She stood at her window looking out across the darkened fields, watching shadows that might have been men or might have been trees moving in the wind. It was impossible to tell. Possible to know if the danger was real or imagined, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Around midnight, she heard her father leave his room, heard his footsteps cross to the kitchen. She followed, finding him sitting at the table with an oil lamp burning low, a piece of paper before him, a pencil in his hand. "Pa, what are you writing?" Thomas looked up, and in the lamplight, his face showed every one of his 52 years. "A letter. To you. In case." He did not finish the sentence. Did not need to, Sarah understood. In case I don't make it. In case this ends the way these things sometimes end. She sat across from him, her throat tight. "Don't talk like that." "Sarah," Thomas set down the pencil, folded his weathered hands on the table. "I trained you to shoot because I wanted you to be able to protect yourself. But I never wanted you to have to use that training. Never wanted you to carry what I carry." "What do you carry, Ghosts?" Thomas's voice was barely above a whisper. 47 faces I see when I close my eyes. 47 men who never got to grow old, who never got to see their children grow, who died because I was good at my job." He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "These hands took lives, Sarah. Lots of them. And no matter how necessary it was, no matter how justified, that weight never leaves you." Sarah reached across the table, covering her father's hands with her own. "You did what you had to do. You protected your fellow soldiers. You served your country." "Yes." Thomas met her eyes. "And every night for 20 years I've wondered if there was another way. If I could have been a little slower, a little less accurate. If some of those men could have lived, if I'd just been a little bit worse at killing." The lamp flickered, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called, lonely and distant. Pa, Sarah said carefully, "What happened to Mama?" "The real story. Not the version you told me when I was 14. The whole truth." Thomas was quiet for so long, Sarah thought he might not answer. Then he stood, went to a drawer, and pulled out a folded paper yellowed with age. He smoothed it on the table. It was a drawing, crude but detailed. A boot print. "This," he said, "is what I found at the scene where your mother died. Someone had stepped in her blood. Left a print." He pointed to the pattern. "See this grid pattern in the heel? Diamond-shaped nails. Not a common sole. Custom made. Probably from back east." Sarah leaned forward, studying the pattern. "And you never found who it belonged to?" "Not for 6 years." Thomas's finger traced the drawing. "Until 3 months ago, when Daniel Mercer walked into the Dusty Rose wearing a pair of custom boots with this exact pattern." The air left Sarah's lungs. "You think Daniel killed Mama?" "I think Daniel or someone connected to him was there that night." Thomas folded the paper carefully. "I've been digging since he arrived. The railway company first surveyed this route 7 years ago. They sent agents ahead to assess land values, identify obstacles. Margaret was killed a year later, right after she refused to sell to a man matching Daniel's description. He was here before Sarah. Under a different name perhaps, but he was here. Then he disappeared when the killing didn't work and the railway delayed their plans. Now they're ready to build, and he's back to finish what he started. And Augustus remembers too. He was the one who helped me carry her body home. He saw the print before the rain washed it away." Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud in the quiet house. "Then we tell the sheriff. We show him this. We have a drawing of a boot print from 6 years ago with no witnesses, no weapon, no evidence beyond this." Thomas shook his head. "Daniel would laugh it off. Say lots of people have fancy boots. Say I'm making wild accusations to avoid paying my debt." He spread his hands. "All it would do is make us look desperate, so we do nothing." Thomas stood, walked to his daughter, placed both hands on her shoulders. "We stay alive. We protect this land. We hold out for 30 days until the marshal investigates. And if Daniel makes a move before then," his voice hardened, "we defend ourselves. Legally, justifiably. But we don't go looking for revenge. Revenge makes you stupid, makes you predictable, makes you dead." Sarah wanted to argue, to demand action, to do something with the rage building in her chest. But she saw the wisdom in her father's eyes, the hard-earned knowledge of a man who had survived 4 years of war through discipline, more than courage. She nodded. 30 days. 30 days, Thomas agreed. They stood together in the lamplight, father and daughter, soldier and student, bound by blood and training, and the unspoken knowledge that the next month would determine whether the Wright family survived or became another tragedy buried in Wyoming soil. Outside, the night deepened, and in Red Hollow, Daniel Mercer lay awake in his rented room, staring at the ceiling, knowing that he had set events in motion that could not be stopped, knowing that he had pushed good people toward violence because his own desperation left him no choice, knowing that when this was over, someone would be dead, and hoping with a hope that bordered on prayer that it would not be him. The days that followed felt like standing in a storm that had not yet broken, but whose electricity made the hair stand up on your arms. The Wright farm became an island isolated not by water, but by suspicion and carefully cultivated fear. And on that island, 3 people prepared for war. Augustus came to the farm on the 4th night after the contest, riding fast, his horse lathered. Thomas met him at the door, rifle ready. "It's me, calm down." Augustus dismounted, breathing hard. "We need to talk. All of us." Inside, Sarah put coffee on while Augustus caught his breath. When they were seated around the table, he pulled a folded telegram from his pocket. "I sent word to the U.S. Marshal's office like you asked. This came back this morning." He unfolded it, read aloud. "Investigation opened. We'll send agent within 14 days. Maintain property. Avoid confrontation. Sign it, Marshal Henry Blackwood." 14 days, Sarah said. "That's halfway through our 30. Augustus nodded. "But here's the problem. Daniel knows I sent that telegram. The clerk at the telegraph office is on his payroll. He knows federal law is coming, which means he has 2 weeks to force you off this land before it all falls apart." Thomas absorbed this, his face grim. He'll escalate. Move from pressure to direct action. Already started. Augustus pulled out another paper, this one a printed notice. "This is being distributed tomorrow. Public safety meeting. Discussion of armed and potentially dangerous residents. Daniel's going to ask Sheriff Donovan to confiscate your weapons." "Under what legal authority?" Sarah asked. "Doesn't matter if it's legal." Augustus leaned back, rubbing his face. "If the sheriff shows up with deputies and a crowd of the concerned citizens, what do? Resist and you look guilty. Comply and you're defenseless." "So it's a trap either way," Thomas said flatly. "Every move has been a trap," Augustus replied. "The contest, the rumors, the debt, now this. He's boxing you and making every option a bad one. Then we change the game," Sarah said suddenly. Both men looked at her. "We stop reacting and start acting. We go to the sheriff first. Show him the boot print drawing. Tell him about Mama. Make Daniel defend himself instead of always being on a fence." Thomas shook his head. "We have no evidence. It'll just look like deflection." "But it plants a seed," Sarah insisted. "Makes people wonder. Makes them question if maybe Daniel has his own secrets. Right now, everyone thinks we're the dangerous ones. We need them to see he's not what he pretends to be." Augustus considered this, then slowly nodded. "It might work, not to convict him, but to create enough doubt that people hesitate. That the sheriff thinks twice before confiscating weapons without due process." Thomas stood, paced to the window, looked out at the darkness beyond. "In the war," he said quietly, "the side that controlled the narrative usually won. Not the side with more guns or better position. The side that made people believe their cause was just." He turned back. "Sarah's right. We need to tell our story. Make it public before Daniel twists it further." So tomorrow, Augustus said, we go to Sheriff Donovan together. All 3 of us. Present everything we have. Then we let Daniel respond. Put him on the defensive. "And when he comes after us for it," Sarah asked. "Because he will." Thomas met her eyes. "Then we defend ourselves, but we do it in a way that makes him the aggressor and us the victims. We survive, and we make damn sure everyone knows who started it." They talked through the night, planning strategy, anticipating responses, preparing for every contingency they could imagine. By the time dawn light started filtering through the windows, they had a plan. It was risky. It relied on Sheriff Donovan being more honest than political, but it was something. It was action instead of waiting. As Augustus prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Thomas, there's one more thing. Daniel's been hiring men, not local boys like Henry and Raymond. Professionals from Cheyenne, gunmen. How many? 2 that I know of. Maybe more. Men who do this for money, not loyalty. Men who won't hesitate." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then we make sure we don't give them a reason to draw. We stay legal. Stay careful. We survive this with our hands clean." Augustus gripped Thomas's shoulder. "Your hands were never clean, brother. Not after the war, not after Margaret, but they were always honorable. That's what matters." After Augustus left, Sarah found her father still standing at the door watching the sunrise paint the wheat fields gold. She stood beside him, and for a moment they were simply father and daughter, watching the world wake up, pretending tomorrow was not coming, fast as a bullet. Pa, she said quietly. What if we just left, sold to Daniel, took the money, started over somewhere else? Thomas was silent for a long time. Then you know why we can't do that. Because of Mama's grave. Because if we run, we teach every bully in the world that pressure works, that fear wins, that good people will always fold if you push hard enough. He looked at her. Your mother didn't raise a coward. Neither did I. We stand because someone has to stand. Because this land is ours not by law alone, but by right, by blood, by 22 years of sweat. He straightened his shoulders. And we'll be damned before we let a man like Daniel Mercer take that from us. Sarah felt pride swell in her chest, mixed with fear, mixed with the strange clarity that comes when you understand exactly what you're fighting for and exactly what it might cost. Then we stand, she said simply. Then we stand, Thomas agreed. The sun climbed higher. Red Hollow woke to another day of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. And on the Wright farm, 3 people prepared to walk into town and tell a truth that no one wanted to hear. By noon, they would learn if truth was stronger than fear, if honor could stand against desperation, if 3 people standing together could weather a storm built from lies and ambition and the terrible things people do when they convince themselves the end justifies the means. By noon, everything would change. The sun was high and merciless when they rode into Red Hollow. The sheriff's office sat at the corner of Main Street and 3rd, a small building that smelled of old coffee and older wood. Sheriff Donovan was 53, gray-haired and cautious a man who had learned that keeping the peace meant knowing when to enforce the law and when to let small transgressions slide. He looked up from his desk when Thomas, Sarah, and Augustus entered, and his face showed he had been expecting them. Mr. Wright, Miss Wright, Augustus. He gestured to chairs. Figured you'd be coming by eventually. Thomas remained standing. Sheriff, we need to talk about Daniel Mercer. Donovan sighed, leaning back in his chair. Let me guess. You think he's railroading you off your land through intimidation and false documents? He is, Augustus said flatly. And we can prove it. Can you? Donovan's eyes were tired. Because all I've got is a legal debt notice from a Philadelphia bank, a town full of nervous people worried about armed residents, and Daniel Mercer acting like a model citizen who just wants what's rightfully owed. Thomas stepped forward, pulling the folded paper from his coat. 6 years ago, my wife was murdered on the road from this town, killed by 2 men who were never found. He unfolded the drawing, placed it on Donovan's desk. I found this boot print in her blood. Custom sole grid pattern diamond nails. Distinctive. Donovan studied the drawing. I remember Margaret's death. I wasn't sheriff then, but I remember. Terrible thing. 3 months ago, Thomas continued. Daniel Mercer arrived in Red Hollow wearing boots with this exact pattern. The office went very quiet. Donovan looked up slowly. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, Sarah said, her voice steady. Daniel Mercer, or someone connected to him, killed my mother. And now he's trying to steal our land to cover it up. Donovan stood, walked to his window, looked out at the street. Even if this is true, and I'm not saying it is, this drawing proves nothing. It's 6 years old. No witnesses, no weapon, no physical evidence beyond a sketch. But it establishes motive, Augustus argued. It shows Daniel has reasons to want the rights gone beyond just the railway deal. It makes him suspect instead of victim. The sheriff turned back, his face conflicted. Here's my problem. Daniel Mercer has lawyers, has documents, has the railway company backing him. What do you have a boot print drawing from 6 years ago in a town full of people who saw your daughter shoot like a trained killer? Because I am trained, Sarah said. My father taught me to protect myself after my mother was murdered, and the law did nothing. The words hit Donovan like a slap. His jaw tightened. I understand you're angry, but training your daughter in military marksmanship, then hiding it for years, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in your judgment. Thomas's voice went cold and hard. My judgment kept her alive. My judgment prepared her for a world that doesn't protect women, doesn't protect families, doesn't do a damn thing except fill out paperwork after people are already dead. Donovan met his eyes. I know you were a soldier, Thomas. I know what you did in the war. But this isn't the war. This is a town trying to stay peaceful and having someone with your skills teaching someone else those skills living among us that makes people nervous. So you're saying we should have stayed helpless? Sarah's voice shook with anger. We should have just accepted that bad things happen and done nothing to prepare. I'm saying, Donovan replied carefully, that there's a difference between preparation and being a threat. And right now, rightly or wrongly, this town sees you as the latter. Augustus slammed his hand on the desk. That's because Daniel's been poisoning them against the rights for weeks, spreading rumors, holding meetings, turning neighbors into enemies. And you're letting him do it. What would you have me do? Donovan's voice rose. Arrest him for what? Holding legal documents, speaking at town meetings, being concerned about public safety. Show me a crime I can charge him with, Fraud Thomas said. Conspiracy. The debt documents are forged. The medical reports about my supposed instability are fake. He's manufacturing evidence to support an illegal land grab. Prove it, Donovan challenged. Bring me hard evidence and I'll act. But drawings and accusations aren't enough. We've contacted the U.S. Marshal, Augustus said. They're sending an investigator within 2 weeks. Donovan's eyebrows rose. You went over my head. We went to the law, Thomas corrected. Since local law seemed more interested in keeping the peace than finding the truth, the sheriff's face flushed red. I could arrest you right now for that comment, but you won't, Sarah said quietly, because you know we're right. You know something's wrong here. You just don't want to stick your neck out. Donovan stared at the young woman, seeing in her eyes the same steel he had seen in Thomas's, the same refusal to bend that had kept the union together through 4 bloody years. He looked away first. I'll tell you what I'll do, he said finally. I'll look into the debt documents. Quietly, I'll ask some questions about Daniel Mercer's background, and I'll hold off on any weapons confiscation until I have more information. That's all we're asking, Thomas said. A fair investigation. But Donovan continued, you need to stay out of trouble. No confrontations, no threats. You keep to your farm and let me do my job. And if Daniel doesn't keep to his side, Augustus asked, then you come to me. You don't take matters into your own hands. The sheriff's voice was firm. I mean it, Thomas. You were a soldier. You know how to kill efficiently, but this isn't war. You can't just eliminate the enemy and walk away clean. Thomas held the sheriff's gaze. I've never killed anyone outside of war, Sheriff, and I don't plan to start now. But if someone comes onto my property with violent intent, I will defend my family. That's not murder. That's the law. Just make damn sure it actually is defense, Donovan said, because I've seen how soldiers define threats. Sometimes you shoot first and ask questions later. Only if questions will get you killed, Thomas replied. They left the sheriff's office with a fragile truce in place. As they walked toward their horses, Sarah noticed people watching from storefronts from across the street. Whispers followed them like shadows. That went better than expected, Augustus said quietly. Did it? Thomas mounted his horse. We bought time, maybe, but we didn't change minds. The town still fears us. Daniel still has the advantage. At least Donovan won't confiscate weapons immediately, Sarah offered. Thomas looked at her. Don't mistake delay for victory. Daniel will hear about this conversation within the hour, and he'll move faster now knowing we're fighting back. They were halfway back to the farm when they saw the smoke. It rose in a thin black column from the direction of the Wright property, visible for miles against the clear blue sky. Thomas kicked his horse into a gallop, Sarah and Augustus racing behind. The 3 miles had never felt longer. When they crested the final hill, they could see the source. Not the house, thank God, but the hay barn flames climbing the walls, smoke pouring from the loft. Thomas leaped from his horse while it was still moving, running toward the well, grabbing buckets. Sarah and Augustus joined him, forming a chain, hauling water, throwing it against flames that laughed at their efforts. The hay was too dry, the fire too established. All they could do was wet down the surrounding buildings, prevent the blaze from spreading. By the time the barn collapsed in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the sky, all 3 were covered in soot and ash, hands, blistered lungs burning from smoke. Thomas stood looking at the smoking ruins, his face like carved stone. This was a message. Augustus nodded. Daniel's answer to your visit to the sheriff? They didn't even try to hide it. Sarah said, her voice shaking with exhausted rage. It's broad daylight. Someone had to see. That's the point, Thomas said quietly. They want us to know, want us to feel helpless. He turned to face his daughter and his friend. This is where it changes. From intimidation to direct action. From pressure to violence. What do we do? Sarah asked. Thomas looked at the smoking barn, then at the house, then at the two people standing with him. We prepare for siege. We gather supplies. We fortify the house. And we wait for them to make their next move. But Pa, if we just wait, we wait, Thomas interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, because going after them makes us the aggressors. But when they come here onto our land threatening our lives, then we're defenders. Then the law is on our side. He's right, Augustus said. Daniel's is trying to provoke you into attacking him. Don't give him that satisfaction. So we just let him burn our property. Sarah gestured at the ruined barn. We document it, Thomas said. We tell the sheriff. We create a paper trail. And when the marshal arrives, we have evidence of systematic harassment and destruction. And if Daniel doesn't wait for the marshal, Augustus asked, then we defend ourselves, Thomas said simply. But we do it right, we do it clean. And we make damn sure everyone knows who started it. That night, Elijah Barnes sat in his rented room above the general store, staring at the bottle in his hand. He had not opened it, had simply held it, using the weight as an anchor, while his mind churned through the choices that had led him here. Daniel had visited that afternoon after the barn fire, had been pleased with himself, talking about how the Wrights were learning that resistance had consequences, had mentioned that the next step would be more direct, more personal, had looked at Elijah with those cold gray eyes and said, "You're with me on this, right? Because I need to know my people are loyal." Elijah had nodded, had said yes, had watched Daniel leave feeling like he had just sold another piece of his soul. His brother's face floated up from memory, 15 years old, laughing, holding a rifle he had no business touching. Elijah had told him to put it down, but not firmly enough, had let his younger brother talk him into target practice, into pretending they were soldiers, into pointing weapons at imagined enemies. The gun had gone off. An accident. A terrible permanent accident. Elijah had watched his brother bleed out in a field of wheat, had felt the life leave that young body, had carried the guilt ever since, like a stone in his chest. And now he was part of something that would lead to more death. Different circumstances, same outcome. People would die because he was too weak to stand against it. He set down the bottle, stood, and made a decision. 2 hours later, long past midnight, he was riding toward the Wright farm. Thomas heard the horse coming when it was still half a mile out. He was on the porch, rifle across his lap, having taken first watch while Sarah slept. He stood moving into shadow weapon ready. "Mr. Wright," a voice called from the darkness. "It's Elijah Barnes. I'm alone. Unarmed. Please, I need to talk." Thomas kept the rifle raised. "Step into the light where I can see you." Elijah guided his horse forward until the lantern light reached him. His hands were raised empty, his face pale and frightened. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I can't stay silent anymore." Sarah emerged from the house, pistol in hand. "Pa, it's Elijah," Thomas said, not lowering the rifle. "Says he wants to talk." "Let him approach," Sarah said, "but keep him covered." Elijah dismounted slowly, hands still raised. When he reached the porch, he looked at both of them with desperate eyes. "Daniel's planning something, soon. Maybe tomorrow night. He's hired 2 professional gunmen from Cheyenne. Real killers, not amateurs like Raymond and me." "Why are you telling us this?" Thomas asked. "Because I'm tired of being a coward." Elijah's voice cracked. "My brother died because I didn't have the courage to stop him from doing something stupid. I won't watch another family destroyed because I was too scared to act." Sarah lowered her pistol slightly. "What exactly is Daniel planning?" "I don't know all the details." Elijah swallowed hard. "But I heard him talking about forcing you off the land before the marshal arrives, about making it look justified. He's going to create a situation where you seem like the aggressors, then use lethal force in supposed self-defense." Thomas finally lowered the rifle. "How many men will he bring?" "5 for certain. Daniel, Henry, Raymond, and the 2 gunmen from Cheyenne, all armed." He looked between them. "You can't win that fight. Not straight up." "We can if we're prepared," Thomas said. "If we know they're coming. That's why I'm here." Elijah stepped closer. "I'm done working for Daniel. I'm done being part of something evil. If you'll have me, I want to help. I want to stand with you." Thomas studied the young man, seeing the fear and guilt and desperate need for redemption written on his face. Finally, he extended his hand. Welcome to the right side, Elijah. They spent the rest of the night planning. Thomas drew diagrams of the house and surrounding area, marking fields of fire, discussing defensive positions, planning for multiple scenarios. By the time dawn broke, they had a strategy. It was risky, outnumbered as they were, but it gave them a chance. Augustus arrived at first light bringing news from town. The sheriff's asking questions about Daniel. Not publicly, but people are noticing. And there's been a telegram from Cheyenne. The marshal's investigation has been expedited. He'll be here in 7 days instead of 14. So Daniel has 1 week to finish this, Sarah said, which means he'll move soon. Thomas agreed, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but soon. Augustus set a shotgun on the table. Then we'd better be ready. They spent the day fortifying the house, boarding up windows that didn't need to provide firing positions, moving furniture to create barricades, stocking ammunition, preparing water in case of fire. Every action was methodical, practical, the accumulated wisdom of a man who had survived sieges before. As evening approached, Sarah found her father standing at their makeshift firing position overlooking the front approach. Pa, she said quietly, if this goes bad tonight, if something happens to you, I need you to know something. Don't, Thomas said. Don't say goodbyes. We're going to survive this. Let me say it anyway. Sarah stepped beside him. Everything you taught me about shooting, about standing firm, about protecting what's yours, that wasn't just training. That was love. You didn't make me into a weapon. You gave me tools to survive. And whatever happens, I'll use those tools the way you taught me. To protect, not to punish. Thomas pulled his daughter into a tight embrace. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. They stood together as the sun set, painting the Wyoming grasslands in gold and crimson, beautiful and indifferent as always. Darkness came with no moon clouds having rolled in during the late afternoon. Perfect weather for men who did not want to be seen. Inside the Wright house, 4 people waited. Thomas at the front window, Sarah upstairs with a view of the side approach, Augustus at the back, Elijah mobile ready to reinforce wherever needed. The clock on the mantel showed 10:15 when they heard the horses, 5 riders coming slow, spreading out as they approached, trying to encircle the house. Thomas recognized Daniel's silhouette, tall and rigid in the saddle. The others were harder to identify in the darkness, but he counted them. 5, as Elijah had predicted. They stopped 50 feet from the house, just outside easy rifle range. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel's voice cut through the night. Thomas Wright, I have a court order for your arrest, unlawful threatening, destruction of property. You need to come out with your hands up, Thomas called back. That's a lie and you know it. The law doesn't care what you think you know, Daniel replied. Come out or we'll be forced to take action. Augustus's voice came from the side of the house. What destruction of property, Daniel? The barn you burned yourself, Mr. Miller, Daniel said, sounding almost sad. You're making yourself an accessory. Last chance to leave before this gets ugly. I'm exactly where I belong, Augustus shot back. Sarah could see from her upstairs window as the riders shifted hands, moving toward weapons. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady on her rifle. Years of training had prepared her body even if her heart rebelled against what was coming. Thomas, one more time, Daniel called. Surrender or face the consequences. Thomas's answer was to cock his rifle to sound loud in the quiet night. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then Raymond Dalton, drunk and angry, fired at the house. The bullet smashed through a window, punching into the far wall. Thomas did not return fire. Not yet. He needed them to be the clear aggressors, needed witnesses to see who started the violence. Raymond fired again more wildly. Henry joined in nervous trigger pulls that went wide. Then the professional gunmen opened up their shooting, more controlled, more dangerous. Only then did Thomas fire back a single shot that kicked up dirt between the horses, making them rear in panic. Not trying to kill, not yet. Still trying to de-escalate, even as bullets tore into his home. Sarah fired from upstairs, aiming for the muzzle flashes. Her bullet caught one of the hired guns in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse with a scream of pain. Augustus's shotgun boomed from the back, the spread hitting one of the horses and making it bolt, carrying Raymond away into the darkness against his will. Elijah, positioned at a side window, fired at Henry's horse, deliberately missing the man, but spooking the animal enough to make it run. Henry clung to the saddle, shouting curses as he disappeared into the night. Daniel realized his force was disintegrating. He wheeled his horse, shouting orders, trying to rally his men. But the remaining hired guns, seeing his partner bleeding in the dirt, decided his pay was not worth dying for. He rode hard for town, leaving Daniel with only himself and Frank, the second professional who had flanked around to the barn ruins. "Fall back," Daniel shouted. "Regroup at the fence line." They retreated, pulling the wounded man with them. Thomas held his fire, letting them go. In war, you did not shoot fleeing enemies if you could avoid it. It was one of those unwritten rules that separated soldiers from murderers. Sarah Thomas called up the stairs. "You hit." "No, I'm fine." Augustus, Elijah. Both reported safe. They had won the first exchange, driven off the attack without killing anyone. But Thomas knew this was not over. This was just the opening move. From the darkness beyond the fence, Daniel's voice came again, different now. Desperate, unhinged. "You think you've won. You think shooting my men makes you heroes. We didn't start this," Daniel Thomas shouted back. "We just finished it. Go home. Wait for the marshal. Let the law handle this." "The law?" Daniel laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "The law is whatever I make it. I own the bank. I own half the town council. I own everything except that piece of dirt you're sitting on, and I'll have that too, one way or another." "Not tonight, you won't," Augustus called. "Go home, Daniel. You lost." There was a long pause. Then they heard the unmistakable sound of liquid being poured, smelled the sharp tang of kerosene on the wind. "If I can't have it," Daniel screamed, "then neither can you. I'll burn you out like the vermin you are." Thomas's blood went cold. "He's going to fire the house. We have to stop him," Sarah said, starting down the stairs. "No," Thomas ordered. "You stay inside. All of you stay inside." He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber. "I'm going out." "Pano?" Sarah grabbed his arm. "That's what he wants. He'll shoot you the moment you step outside." Thomas looked at his daughter, at Augustus, at Elijah. He saw fear in their faces, but also trust. Trust that he knew what he was doing. Trust earned over years and proven over days. "If I don't go out, he'll burn the house with all of us in it. We'll have to run, and when we do, he'll pick us off one by one." He gently removed Sarah's hand. "This is the only way." "Let me go," Elijah said suddenly. "I can talk to him. Reason with him." "He's past reason," Thomas said. "But Elijah, I need you to do something else. When I step out that door, when Daniel focuses on me, you take the side door. Run for town. Get the sheriff. Bring help and leave you here." Elijah shook his head. "It's not leaving. It's completing the mission." Thomas gripped the young man's shoulder. "In war, you do what's necessary to achieve the objective. Our objective is survival and justice. You running for help achieves both." Elijah struggled with it, then nodded. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Thomas said. He turned to Augustus. "You're in command until I get back. Protect Sarah. Protect the house." Thomas Augustus started. "That's an order, soldier." Augustus straightened, despite himself, old habits responding to command voice. "Yes, sir." Finally, Thomas faced his daughter. "Everything I taught you, everything I tried to pass on, it all comes down to one thing. Strength is not about how many you can hurt. It's about how many you can protect." He kissed her forehead. "You protect these people. You protect this house. You protect the memory of your mother." "Pa, please," Sarah's voice broke. "Remember what I said. The gun is for protection, never punishment." Thomas handed her a folded letter from his pocket. "If I don't make it back, this is for you. Don't read it unless you have to." Then he opened the door and stepped into the night. Daniel saw the door open, saw Thomas Wright emerge with his rifle at his side, and for a moment he felt something like triumph. The old soldier was surrendering, coming out to negotiate. This could still end in Daniel's favor. Then he saw Thomas's face in the starlight and realized his mistake. This was not surrender. This was sacrifice. Thomas walked forward slowly, deliberately, hands visible on his rifle but not threatening. Behind him he heard the side door open quietly, heard Elijah slip away into the darkness toward town. Good. Part of the plan was working. "That's far enough," Daniel called when Thomas was 20 feet away. Thomas stopped. "It's over, Daniel. The marshal is coming. The sheriff is investigating. Even if you kill me, you won't get the land. You'll just hang for murder." "I won't hang," Daniel said. His voice was strange, tight. "I'll tell them you attacked me, that you came out shooting. Self-defense." He raised his pistol, not quite pointing it at Thomas, but close. "No witnesses to say otherwise." There are three witnesses in that house, Thomas said calmly. Who will be dead when the fire spreads? Daniel countered. You really think you can kill 4 people and walk away clean? Thomas shook his head. You're smarter than that, Daniel. I'm desperate, Daniel corrected, and desperate men don't have the luxury of smart choices. Behind Daniel Frank, the hired gun shifted position, and Thomas saw him clearly for the first time. Saw the way he held his weapon. Saw the look in his eyes. This man had killed before. Many times. He was the real danger here. Why do you want this land so badly? Thomas asked, trying to buy time, hoping Elijah was making good progress toward town. The railway will find another route. Life will go on. Not my life, Daniel said bitterly. You want to know the truth? Fine. I was somebody once, a lawyer in Philadelphia, had a practice, a reputation. Then I made one mistake, took money from the wrong client, got caught, lost everything, my career, my family, my name. That's not our fault, Thomas said. No, but your land is my redemption. My one chance to prove I'm still worth something, that I can still accomplish something. Daniel's hand shook on his pistol. I can't lose this. I won't lose this. So you'll kill for it. I'll do whatever it takes. Even murder an innocent woman 6 years ago, Thomas let the words drop like stones into water. Daniel went very still. What did you say, Margaret Wright? My wife. Killed on the road from town by 2 men who wore custom boots. Grid-patterned soles. The same boots you wore when you came to Red Hollow. Daniel's face changed, shock and recognition flickering across it. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Thomas said quietly. You or someone with you. Maybe you didn't mean to kill her. Maybe it went wrong. But you were there, and you've been covering it up ever since. You can't prove that, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not in court, but I know, Augustus knows, and soon the marshal will know. Thomas took a step forward. It's over, Daniel. Accept it. Turn yourself in. Face justice with whatever dignity you have left. For a moment, Daniel wavered. Thomas could see it in his eyes, the war between desperation and reason. Then something hardened. Some final barrier broke. No, Daniel said. If I'm going down, you're coming with me. He raised his pistol, fully aiming at Thomas's chest. Thomas could have raised his rifle, could have fired first, but doing so would make him the aggressor in the eyes of the law, would make everything he had fought for meaningless. So he stood still, trusting that Sarah was watching from the window, that Augustus was ready, that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. Then a voice cut through the night like a whip crack. Drop the weapon, Mercer. Sheriff Donovan rode into the firelight. 3 deputies with him. Elijah had made it to town faster than Thomas had dared hope, had brought help in time. Daniel swung his pistol toward the sheriff. Donovan's rifle spoke first, not a killing shot, but a disarming one. The bullet struck Daniel's hand, sending the pistol spinning away. Daniel screamed, clutching his bloody hand. Frank, the hired gun, started to raise his weapon. A shot from the house, Sarah's rifle kicked up dirt at his feet. He froze, then slowly raised his hands. It's over, Sheriff Donovan repeated, dismounting. Daniel Mercer, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. But even as the deputies moved to restrain Daniel, the wounded man's face twisted with a final desperate rage. He pulled a small derringer from his coat, the kind of backup weapon gamblers and desperate men carried. If I can't have it, he snarled, no one can. The little gun came up, aimed not at the sheriff, but at Thomas, at the man who had ruined everything, who had refused to simply roll over and die. Thomas saw it happening as if in slow motion, saw the derringer, saw Daniel's finger on the trigger, knew he had no time to raise his rifle, no time to dodge. Then a rifle shot cracked from the house. Sarah's rifle fired from the upstairs window where she had repositioned when Thomas went outside. The bullet took Daniel high in the chest, spinning him around. The derringer fired as he felt the shot going wild into the night. Daniel Mercer hit the ground hard and did not move again. The sheriff rushed over, checked for a pulse. He's alive. Barely. He looked up at the house. Who fired? Sarah appeared at the upstairs window, rifle still smoking. I had to. She called down, her voice shaking but steady. He was going to kill Pa. You saw the weapon? Donovan asked. Clear as day, one of the deputies confirmed. Little gun in his hand. It was self-defense. Sarah ran from the house, throwing her arms around her father. Pa, you're okay. You're okay. Thomas held her tight, feeling the tremor in her body, the release of hours of terror. It's over, sweetheart. It's finally over. But even as he said it, he felt something wrong. A wetness spreading across his shirt. He looked down, saw blood. Not his blood. His. The Derringer's wild shot had not been as wild as they thought. It had caught Thomas low in the side, a small entry wound that bled more than it should. Pa Sarah screamed, seeing it. Someone help him. Thomas's legs gave out. He sat down hard, his back against the fence post, hand pressed to his side. Well, he said, voice tight with pain. Guess I'm not bulletproof after all. Don't you dare, Sarah was crying now, pressing her hands over the wound. Don't you dare leave me, Sheriff Donovan shouted for someone to ride for the doctor. Augustus knelt beside Thomas, his face stricken. You old fool, you should have shot first. And proved Daniel right, Thomas managed a weak smile. Had to do it clean, Gus. Had to make sure the law was on our side. To hell with the law, Augustus said, his voice breaking. You're dying for a principle. Not dying, Thomas corrected, though his face was pale. Just paying a price. He looked at Sarah, reached up with a shaking hand to touch her face. Remember what I taught you. This land is yours now. But it's not about the land, I know, Pa. It's about home, about family, about living free. Thomas's eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. More than that, it's about what you do with it, the example you set, the legacy you leave. You're not leaving, Squire insisted. The doctor's coming. You'll be fine. But Thomas could feel the blood loss, could feel the cold creeping into his limbs. He had seen enough death to recognize its approach. Maybe, maybe not. But just in case, he pulled her close, whispered in her ear. Teach them, protect them, become the mentor that others need, the way I was for you. Pa, please. I love you, baby girl. Your mother's waiting for me. But you, his hand squeezed hers. Weakly, you have so much more to do. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. Sarah screamed for him to stay, shook him, begged. But Thomas Wright had given everything he had. The wound, the stress, the years of carrying too much for too long, all of it caught up at once. By the time the doctor arrived 10 minutes later, Thomas was gone. The days that followed moved like a dream, painted in shades of gray. U.S. Marshal Henry Blackwood arrived 4 days after the shooting as promised. His investigation confirmed everything Thomas had suspected. The debt documents were forgeries traced back to a counterfeiter in Philadelphia who identified Daniel as his client. The railway company, confronted with evidence of fraud and conspiracy, disavowed all connection to Mercer. Daniel Mercer survived his wound, but would stand trial for attempted murder, arson, fraud, and conspiracy. The railway company, learning of his methods, disavowed all connection and offered Sarah a fair price for an easement across her land. She accepted enough to be comfortable, but kept the heart of the property, the 40 acres surrounding her parents' graves. The town of Red Hollow struggled with what had happened. Some felt vindicated in their suspicions about the Wrights. Others felt ashamed at how easily they had been manipulated. Most simply tried to move forward, to forget, to pretend that they had not stood by while good people were persecuted. The funeral was held on a Tuesday 3 days after Thomas died. Half the town came, some out of genuine respect, some out of guilt, some simply because that was what you did. They stood in the summer heat and listened as the Reverend spoke words about duty and honor and sacrifice. Sarah stood beside her father's grave, dry-eyed now, all her tears spent in the nights between. Augustus stood on her left, a solid presence. Elijah on her right, the young man who had found his courage too late to save Thomas, but early enough to honor his memory. As the coffin was lowered into the earth beside Margaret's grave, Sarah thought about legacy, about what her father had left behind. Not just land or possessions, but lessons. About standing firm. About protecting the weak. About doing what was right even when it cost everything. That night, alone in the house that felt too empty, she found the letter Thomas had given her. She opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Sarah, it read in her father's careful script. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't grieve too long. Your mother and I are together now, and that's all we ever wanted. What I need from you is to keep living, keep fighting, keep protecting. You asked me once why I taught you to shoot. Here's the real answer, the one I never had the courage to say out loud. I taught you because I saw in you the same fire your mother had. the same refusal to accept injustice, the same steel that said this far and no further. But fire without control is destruction. Steel without purpose is just metal. So I gave you control. I gave you purpose. I taught you that strength is nothing without responsibility, that power is meaningless without compassion. Now I'm asking you to pass it on. Find others who need what I gave you. Teach them. Protect them. Help them find their own strength. That's the legacy I want. Not a name on a headstone, but a chain of strong people, each teaching the next, each standing a little taller because someone believed in them. Be that someone for others, Sarah. Be what I tried to be for you. And know that every life you touch, every person you help, find their courage. That's me living on through you. I love you more than words can express. Your proud father, Thomas. Sarah folded the letter carefully, held it to her chest, and made a decision. Her father wanted a legacy. She would give him one. 6 months after Thomas died, Sarah Wright opened the first shooting school for women in Wyoming. She called it the Wright Academy of Self-Defense, and she taught not just marksmanship, but confidence, strategy, awareness. The things her father had given her. The first class had 5 women. Within a year, there were 20. Within 3 years, the academy had trained over 200 women across 5 states, and requests were coming from as far as California. Sarah taught them all the same thing her father had taught her. Shoot only when you must, but when you must shoot to protect. 5 years after Thomas died, Elijah Barnes, now sheriff of Red Hollow, after Donovan retired, stood on Sarah's porch and asked her to marry him. She considered it seriously but ultimately declined. Not because she did not care for him, but because her purpose had become clear. She was meant to teach to protect, to build the legacy her father had asked for. Elijah accepted her answer with grace and remained a close friend and ally, helping her navigate the legal and social challenges of running a school that some still considered scandalous. 10 years after Thomas died on a summer morning, much like the one when this all began, Sarah stood on her porch looking out across the wheat fields. The farm was smaller now, much of the land leased to the railway, but what remained was hers absolutely. Behind her, the academy building bustled with activity. 15 students that week, ranging in age from 16 to 50, all learning what it meant to be strong without being cruel, powerful without being tyrannical. A young woman approached, nervous eyes downcast. "Miss Sarah, I'm Emily. I heard you teach women to protect themselves." Sarah smiled, seeing in this girl's eyes the same fear and hope she had once carried. "Come in, Emily. You're in the right place." As she led the girl inside, she thought of her father, of the lessons he had taught not through words alone, but through example, through sacrifice, through the simple act of standing when it would have been easier to run. And she thought of all the women she had taught, all the ones she would teach, each one carrying forward a piece of Thomas Wright's legacy. Each one proving that strength comes not from violence, but from the courage to stand, the wisdom to know when to fight, the compassion to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That was the legacy, not a name on a headstone, but a living chain of strong people helping others find their strength. And it would continue long after Sarah herself was gone, past from teacher to student to teacher again, a gift that multiplied with every generation. Because that was what Thomas Wright had understood in his final moments. That true strength is not measured in how many you can defeat, but in how many you can lift up. That the greatest weapon is not a rifle, but knowledge. That the most powerful act is not killing your enemy, but teaching your daughter to survive without you. The sun climbed higher over the Wright farm. In the academy, women learned to shoot to stand, to claim their right to safety and strength. And somewhere, perhaps, Thomas and Margaret Wright looked down and smiled, knowing that the land they had fought for, the home they had died for, had become something greater than they had ever imagined. A place where the weak learned to be strong, where the frightened learned to be brave, where legacy was not inherited but earned one lesson at a time, one student at a time, one act of courage building upon another, until the chain stretched across generations and across a nation, slowly learning that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest of all is the strength to teach. Sarah Wright stood in the doorway of her academy, watching her students practice, and she understood at last what her father had known all along. Some battles you win with bullets, but the battles that truly matter, the ones that change the world, those you win with what you pass on. with the example you set, with the courage you inspire in others. That was the victory Thomas Wright had won. Not in the moment of his death, but in everything that followed. In every woman who learned to stand a little straighter. In every daughter taught to protect herself. In every community that became a little safer because someone had learned that strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners. The legacy lived, and it would continue to live long after everyone who remembered Thomas Wright by name had passed into history. Because the best legacies are not carved in stone. They are written in the lives we touch and the people we empower to touch others in turn. That was the truth Thomas Wright had died to protect. And that was the truth Sarah Wright would spend the rest of her life teaching. One student at a time, one life at a time. One act of courage building upon another until the chains stretched from the past into the future and bound them all together in the simple understanding that we are strongest when we lift others up, bravest when we stand together, and most truly ourselves when we use our strength to protect rather than to harm. The sun moved across the sky. The academy hummed with purpose. And in the wheat fields surrounding the Wright farm, the wind moved through the golden stalks like a whisper from the past carrying forward into an uncertain future, the only message that truly mattered. Stand, teach, protect, pass it on.